Hey, my name is Indeep Janta, and today I'm going to be talking to you about what happened in Hinkley, California. So the purpose or the objective of this presentation is to provide an overview using graphs, charts, and figures of the groundwater contamination episode by natural and anthropogenic hexavalent chromium that occurred in Hinkley, California between 1952 and 1966, and the unfolding of the cleanup and community response to the contamination. So for some background, the Pacific Gas and Electric Company built compressor stations to run natural gas from Texas to Oregon via pipeline, and one of these compressor stations was built in Hinkley. From 1952 to 1964, the cooling water treating with a compound containing chromium to prevent corrosion, that cooling water leaked into the groundwater, which contaminated the drinking water with chromium. The residents reportedly became sick as a result of this contamination. Reportedly, Hinkley's groundwater contained concentrations as high as 580 parts per billion of chromium, which is more than 10 times California's current drinking water standard of 50 parts per billion. And this issue gained national attention when Aaron Brockovich took an interest in the documents. Actually, before this, PG&E maintained that the water was fine, nothing really happened. And then Aaron Brockovich, who was at the time a newly employed intern, stumbled upon these documents. And while investigating them, she realized there was more to the story, and she pushed for a trial, which did happen. It's called Anderson et al. Versus Pacific Gas and Electric. And in 1996, Pacific Gas and Electric settled this case for $333 million. And the settlement is the largest ever paid in a direct action lawsuit in the United States. So the chromium affects an area of groundwater at least 8 miles long and 2 miles wide. Chromium is known and has been determined to be a human carcinogen. In workers, it's been shown to cause lung cancer. It also causes lung cancer in animals. An increase in stomach tumors was observed in humans and animals exposed to chromium in drinking water. These are all talking about chromium-6, by the way. And so here's just a map showing the plume of chromium that occurred from PG&E's leaking compressor, or the water that was treating the compressor. And you can see that the red zone is where chromium-6 exceeded 50 parts per billion. So that's exceeding California's maximum limit. And the orange is where the chromium-6 was between 10 and 50 parts per billion. And the yellow was where chromium-6 was between 3.1 and 10 parts per billion. And you can see where the compressor station is as well. So here's just some maps of the Hinkley groundwater monitoring and plume maps. These are published several times a year from 2012 to monitor the levels of chromium in Hinkley's groundwater. I just wanted to show these to kind of relate how robust the testing is of this groundwater. It's tested several times a year, and each of these lines is pointing to a testing site or a well. And this information is actually found on hinkleygroundwater.com. So there's a whole website, and there's a robust community effort going towards trying to decrease the amount of chromium in this community's drinking water. So now I'm going to talk about the background concentrations of chromium in Hinkley's groundwater. This study was conducted to determine what concentrations of chromium naturally occur in groundwater in the Hinkley area without the contamination. So the upper tolerance limit, so the 95% upper tolerance limit, was found to be 3.09 for chromium-6 and 3.23 of chromium-3 in the area, and this was found in 2007. And so this was adopted as a cleanup level for remediation at the site. All the other data was also taken in 2007 earlier, but it was controversial because they didn't think that they did a good enough job, a thorough enough job testing sites. So it was redone in 2011. So the other stats are from 2011. And as you can see, the range of chromium is less than 0.2 to 2.69 with an average of 1.19 in the area, and less than 1 to 3.15 with an average of 1.52 of chromium-3 in the area. These are all well under the California State Drinking Water Standard for total chromium of 50 parts per billion and the federal of 100 parts per billion. So this is just the background without the contamination. So as I mentioned before, chromium is known to be a carcinogen in humans. And so there was expected to be a higher amount of cancer due to the chromium contamination in this city. So in September of 1995, the regional cancer epidemiologist at the Desert Sierra Cancer Surveillance Program was contacted by a representative of a nationally syndicated television news show with concern about a potential excess of cancer cases in Hinkley. In response to the concern, the cancer epidemiologist initiated a community cancer assessment that included a majority of Hinkley's population. And these cases studies kind of occurred in three big chunks. The first one was between 1988 and 1993. And in this one, the number of new cancer cases, although higher than expected, did not differ significantly from the number expected when considering the age, sex, race, ethnicity, and population size of the census tract. So there was no evidence that there were significantly higher cancer cases in this population. The second study was just an extension of the first one. It was extended from 1988 to 1998. And this assessment also failed to identify an excess number of new cancer cases. In fact, after this, as you can see on the graphs, the observed cases were actually lower than the expected cases. And then there was a third study also conducted by the Desert Sierra Cancer Surveillance Program. And this one studied cancer cases from 1996 to 2008. And so over this time period, 196 cases happened compared to 224.2 new cases expected. So annually, still a lower amount of cases observed than expected, even without contamination. So these preliminary findings did not find a generalized cancer excess in this area encompassing Hinkley, but they did mention that they will continue monitoring cancer occurrence and location in this tract. So talking about the background chromium-6 level in Hinkley and other California communities, there are more than 1,400 drinking water sources in California with chromium-6 levels in the 1 to 5 parts per billion range. And so naturally occurring chromium-6 has been found at similar levels as Hinkley in different regions and locations in California. And so it's kind of clear to see from this graph that the amount of chromium-6 in Hinkley's drinking water is not very high. In fact, it's lower than a lot of other areas in California and significantly lower than the allowable limit of the state of California. Something that I found interesting was although the average hexavalent chromium levels in California were relatively low, especially compared to the maximum allowable limit, there actually were other contaminants in the drinking water of Hinkley that were not getting nearly as much attention that were actually at dangerous levels. So 25 wells were sampled, and of these 25, 7 wells had lead levels above the drinking water standard of 0.015 milligrams per liter. The level of mercury in one well was higher than the drinking water standard of 0.002 milligrams per liter. 8 wells had nitrate levels above the drinking water standard of 10 milligrams per liter, and this amount ranged from 12 to 62 milligrams per liter of nitrate levels in the 8 wells. And 2 wells had thallium levels above the drinking water standard. So overall, I found it really interesting that although it wasn't shown that chromium, so the conclusion of this says that the levels of total chromium measured in the wells are well below the drinking water standard for total chromium and don't pose a health risk. However, the levels of lead, mercury, nitrate, and thallium were above drinking water standards and therefore may pose a health risk. I found it very interesting that there was a lot of attention given to chromium in this area when there's other contaminants that are potentially dangerous, that there isn't enough attention or as much attention paid to. So a summary of this, of what happened in Hinkley, is that the Pacific Gas and Electric Company built a compressor station, and cooling water in the station was treated with a compound containing chromium to prevent corrosion, and this water was discharged into ponds, resulting in soil and groundwater contamination. This turned into a case fueled by Aaron Brockovich called Anderson et al. Versus Pacific Gas and Electric, and this was settled in 1996 for $333 million, the largest settlement ever paid in a direct action lawsuit. And studies following the cancer rates in Hinkley show that they did not reflect an increased rate of cancer than normally expected. These results are slightly controversial. Average levels of chromium-6 in Hinkley aren't necessarily remarkable compared to other locations in California. And but still, in 2006, PG&E agreed to pay $295 million to settle cases involving another 1,100 people statewide. And in 2008, they settled the last of these claims for $20 million. Some other very relevant national news is that in 2007, the National Toxicology Program found that high doses of chromium-6 cause cancers of the gastrointestinal tract in rats and mice at levels higher than 5 milligrams per liter of water. But that's at a level of greater than 5,000 parts per billion. So that's well over the level that is allowed in California. And but this was pivotal in the time because there was no knowledge that high doses of chromium-6 cause cancer. At least there was no definitive proof of it. And so California became the first state to acknowledge a link between ingested hexavalent chromium and cancer in July of 2014, establishing a maximum contaminant level for hexavalent chromium of 10 parts per billion, which is pretty conservative considering that the federal limit established by the EPA is 100 parts per billion. And here are my references. Thanks for listening.